and welcome. You're watching QTV and you're watching The Week in Review, which is our weekly deep dive into 10 big and or interesting stories from the week just gone. And when I say we deep dive, I mean myself and a colleague, Mr. Mboj. Mr. Mboj, welcome to the program.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. And now on today's program, as I said, 10 big stories. We look at the State of the Nation address. We look at what you need to do. What are the qualifications for you to stand for the presidency of this country? We look at the Social Protection Forum and also donation of drugs, yet another donation of drugs to the Gambia Health Service, and one that I'm very, very interested in, a drug to treat sickle cell. So let's get cracking. First story. State of the Nation address was delivered by His Excellency the President, but to respond to it and to respond to National Assembly members, we had the Vice President. Have a look.
I am pleased to update you that progress is made on these, and Cabinet will be presented with the new civil service pay and grading structure on our next sitting. I have received the document, and Cabinet will be sitting on it on the next sitting.
The debate also highlighted concerns such as challenges facing agriculture, including farmers' access to inputs and the need to revitalize cultivation and production of cotton in the Gambia. In response, Dr. Ture informs the NAMS about government's intervention in addressing the concerns raised, which include empowering mixed farmer centers to ensure farmers have better access to inputs.
The government of the Gambia is in a position to revitalize the cotton production in the growing hub of Upper River Region and some parts of Central River Region. In the year 2019 to 2020, a consultant was hired to conduct a feasibility study on production and marketing of cotton as a crop in the Gambia.
A consultant was hired. I always dread when I hear those words, Mr. Mboj, but I'm one of these people naive enough to get excited about the fact that cotton growing might once again rear its head in the Gambia. So that excited me. What about you? Were there things about the State of the Nation address that particularly piqued your interest?
Not really, because we sort of always, we knew that they were modest, as it were, improvements here and there, build lots of roads and all the rest of it. But the key challenge is the heart of the matter here, and given that within the context of COVID-19 as well, contracted economy and that sort of thing, and how much we rely so much on donors, well, we know what's going on outside now, the politics out there. Britain, for instance, recently cut the aid budget. So when you put it in that context, you know that whatever we could achieve would be modest. So when he talked about, the interesting part for me was that referral, deferral for what, 5 years.
That's right.
Quite significant because we were so heavily in debt, isn't it?
That's right.
So and right now the key is, you know, from that, and I also understand that we've got debt relief from ADB,
That's right.
so something like that.
Right.
So what can we do to stimulate the economy? Whatever all the plans we have for any other sector, I think it will truly depend on the economy, job creation, the youth.
And yes, and I think I have to agree with you very, very much so. And the Vice President there mentioned things like, you know, we keep hearing about agriculture and the farming sector and how important it is. And yet every time, and if in terms of the National Assembly members, I thought they kind of gave her an easy ride. Actually, they weren't too hard on her. But things like you talk about job creation and so on, did you see enough to say, actually, it seems there is a policy here that could possibly stimulate growth in, you know, agriculture sector? And I mentioned the cotton growing. I think that's something that's long away in the future. It's not imminent, is it?
No, there wasn't anything like a policy.
Yeah, quite.
With all of it, maybe I shouldn't expect that from a State of the Nation address.
Indeed, yes.
Which is sort of broad direction of government achievements so far, and that sort of thing. So I wasn't expecting much. Perhaps it would have been interesting if he said more on how he was going to stimulate the economy. It appears that now we just depend, for instance, on the debt deferral, when that is done, so we don't need to pay it, and that sort of thing. Perhaps the money that we will save, where are we going to put it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, because you know, I've been banging on about how dependent we've been on tourism, and that kind of COVID has taught us a lesson not to be dependent on one a single sector. And I wanted to hear more along those lines about, diversification, so that dependency eventually goes. We welcome tourism, obviously, and tourists, but I think the dependency that we have come to rely on, COVID forced us actually to think and think again.
Yes, it makes us vulnerable to external shocks.
Sure.
It just depends on whatever happens. Just as with the COVID, nobody could see it coming.
No,
but so this is the thing, the unforeseeable things that always happens, as it were.
Indeed.
So we really have no business. There are some economies where tourism is very high, but when you look around, I'm not sure whether 25% GDP contribution to GDP. I'm not sure if that is, we should be doing that. We should be having that.
It's quite high.
You're so vulnerable, and it leaves you open to all sorts of things.
It will cause you no shock to know that my favorite country, Cape Verde, is equally vulnerable, as it's equally reliant on tourism. But in general, I think you're right. State of the Nation, the response seemed to be about re-emphasizing government achievements, and kind of buttressing them on a national scale. You had National Assembly members questioning, and the Vice President talking about farmers getting more and better fertilizer, etc., that sort of thing. So gentle stuff and a few successes that were mentioned, but I think one that we have to...
absolutely. This is one quote there when she said, there's an inherent weakness in the institutional and legal framework inherited by the government.
That's right.
So this is just general. This was she said this in the context of the legal reforms and that sort of thing. But it is completely general.
Yes,
we talk about this all the time. And the TRRC has given an indication of how the state is working, to me. Yeah. So the sort of degradation, as it were, that may put the whole state structure, but now you have the same people, more or less similar things going on. There has been this continuation. Yeah. So one understands that it's their job. That is really what the challenge is. Sure. For policies to go through, in fact, to come up with the right policies and all of that, to have the best chance of achieving our objectives, our goals. That would be fantastic, because right now, let's be honest, the whole state structure, for most people, appointment didn't depend on competence, but allegiance. Yeah, so there's still that continuation. We must go back to emphasize on competence. It's very basic, but it's absolute key to policies being successfully implemented.
I'm glad you mentioned and ended on successfully implemented, because I was going to mention that what we need are policies that are not just talked about but implemented, including things like disability bill and so on. But what we want is not just for them to be passed, but for them to be implemented. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time. Well, thank you for that, Mr. Moj. Now, for a completely different story, and viewers might be, we can now declare, both myself and Mr. Mboj, that we will not be contesting in the upcoming presidential election. But if you were thinking of, we've made this clip one where you know all you need to know about what is required for you to be able to stand. Have a look.
A candidate shall be a citizen of the Gambia. 2, a candidate must have or attain a minimum age of 30 years. 3, a candidate must have completed senior secondary school education. 4, a candidate must have been ordinarily resident in the Gambia for 5 years immediately preceding the election. 5, a candidate must be nominated by not less than 5,000 voters whose name appeared in the register of voters, with at least 200 being drawn from each of the administrative areas. 6, a candidate must present a sworn declaration of assets. 7, a candidate must also put forward or present an income tax, a tax clearance certificate. 8, a candidate must also pay a deposit of $10,000. 9, a candidate must submit his symbol, color, and photograph to be used in the election. 10. A person who is qualified to register as a voter under the Constitution and the Elections Act may contest as an independent candidate.
There you had it, a much longer than usual clip, because, as I said, for anybody thinking of standing, we wanted you to not say, oh, what about the rest? So we've given you all the conditions. Mr. Mboj, we keep saying this, it's likely to be a packed field, 18 political parties, possibly not 18 potential candidates for the presidency, but nonetheless I expect a few. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. We do know, for instance, historically, what we've seen is that smaller parties do not really contest presidential elections. So they will hang on to one of the bigger ones and will have coalitions.
That word again, coalitions.
Coalitions,
Yes,
that sort of
yes.
thing. I think it has entered the lexicon, the political landscape.
Very much so.
It is unlikely to leave soon.
Yeah.
So that's what will happen in the end. I don't know, 5, 6,
Sure.
possibly something like that. That's what
I think
we'll
that's the sense I get from many people when I speak. They said, oh, it might be 5, 6, maximum 7, possibly. But I mean, the one that made me stop and think, and I discussed this on our This Morning program last week or the week before, was the thing about 5,000 signatures, including 200 from at least each of the region. I'm assuming this has always been there, but for me, I threw this back to the Electoral Commission, and I wanted somebody to ask the question. Unfortunately, they didn't when they went to the press conference. How do you check that those 5,000 signatures are legit, etc., etc.? It's quite a task, but I guess they must have a mechanism for it.
Absolutely, and I think they've been doing it for a while, and that's it. So the 5,000, yes, it will take a huge logistical, because you have to check everything, all of them, against the role you've got.
Indeed,
so that's what they say. So that's it. How long would that take? That would be quite interesting, yes. But for me, yes, there's a practical difficulty, if you like, if you can put it that way. But we should be able to do it.
But the reason I don't doubt it. I think the reason I brought it up and I questioned it was not that I didn't think it was doable necessarily, but given what we've just talked about, the potential number of candidates, if, heaven forbid, we get 18, because 10,000 Dalasies is not going to break any of the political parties. They might think, give it a shot. And if you get 18 people, that's 5,000 times 18. That's
absolutely.
So 90,000 signatures to check?
So of course, automatically the fear would become, or would they sort of try to short circuit, if you like, the confirmation?
Because when you had 2 or 3 people standing,
yes,
checking 5,000 might not be, even though it's a huge enough task. But when potentially you could have 18, then it gets much bigger.
And maybe you'll bring in sort of, I don't know, statisticians, take a sample.
Yes.
That will give you perhaps an indication of overall. So one wonders what method they'll be using.
Sure.
But since this is what they've said, one assumes that they're under a good leadership. They will have prepared. They would have prepared for that sort of thing. There is the potential for 18, and this is just the political parties, independent.
Yeah, quite. This is it.
Perhaps unlikely, we all know, but yet I must prepare from that angle. There is the potential for this. If I get fewer,
then so much the better.
That's cool. But as a manager, I must prepare for the worst case scenario.
That's it. And I think we all agree that it's likely to be quite a contest because you've got political parties, you've got individuals who've declared that they intend to stand.
I hope you will touch the elephant in the living room.
Which is which is well, I'll go there because what I was interested in and I specifically asked the reporter who went to the press conference that was given by the IEC about that very one we've just been watching. I said, ask the question, under what circumstances can one be disqualified from contesting the presidency. It's a question that's been, and what the official did was, and we can show the film if they want, he said you can go to section 62 of the Constitution. It tells you that, well, you know, yes, I can read, but there might be somebody watching who can't read and who's watching my news broadcast or who's listening to my news broadcast, and they might want to know, tell us what it says. That's all, and yet they scouted around it. Is it because they think that if they did go there, a particular individual might think that they were targeting him or her? Let me put it that way. Is that why they didn't respond? But it's a legitimate question to ask. It's a legitimate
question, and everything is in the Constitution.
Because you've given what qualifies somebody.
Absolutely. So why not the other?
Why not the other? Yeah. What disqualifies somebody?
It's
a simple enough question. They dodged it.
Well, being the good students that we are, we followed the advice and went straight to section 62.
And it lists.
It lists. The list there.
Including people who've been convicted, you know, criminal, including people who've been convicted while working in you know, a state institution.
Absolutely. So if you've been sacked from a public service, you know, a public service. But it was interesting to know that president or vice president is not part of.
That's right. That's right. It applies to president.
It applies to president.
Because unlike other countries, and you'll correct me, in every other country that I've followed here, Cape Verde, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, the president and vice president run as a ticket on the same ballot. Both are mentioned and are, you know, their pictures are shown, and you vote for both of them.
Absolutely.
Actually.
That's the American model.
It's the American model, and that is a Sierra Leone model.
It's a Sierra Leone model as well. No, not here.
Sure.
I
became aware after this current president sacked his vice president.
Absolutely. So this is the key, and everybody is talking about it now.
Yes.
62, was it subsection 3?
Yeah.
Something like that.
That's
if
right.
you've been convicted,
that's right.
And you cannot contest.
That's right.
And everybody is saying it because of that. That trial, it was a political trial, granted.
Yeah,
nobody can deny that in 2016. That was a political trial.
That's right.
But something happened in the court.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, there was a conviction.
Right. Yes.
So, in fact, Dabo tried, I think, the Court of Appeal to have that declared null and void.
That's
Even,
right.
I think, tried with the ECJ, the ECOWAS Court of Justice as well, as recently as 2020. And they said, no, they couldn't do that.
That's right.
So, for us journalists and observers, it is a legitimate question.
Absolutely, and you know, I'm not sure why they felt that they needed to dodge it, because it's a question that was probably on the lips of almost every journalist who was there. Because as we've rightly said, if you've given the, you know, what qualifies somebody, then tell us what disqualifies somebody. And it's not an individual. The Constitution does not exist to target an individual. It's a blanket constitution. It applies to everybody and anybody.
Absolutely. People just fall foul of it.
No, that's right.
It doesn't matter
sure.
Who you are. So this will be interesting because we've heard Dabo and many forums before saying stuff like nothing is going to stop him from contesting.
That's right. So I think it's an interesting one, and we'll see.
So what aspect of the law?
Sure.
What is it that he knows?
And he's a lawyer.
Yes, he's a lawyer. That is why I'm always very careful when I try to interpret constitutions or laws or anything. Where I keep telling people, I'm not a lawyer. So I'm always careful. Maybe there's another aspect of the law that he can rely on.
That's right.
I didn't know.
That we mere journalists may have missed.
Journalists may have missed.
Yes, so that will teach me to drop out of school after 2 years. Thank you, Mr. Mboch. Now on to our third story. This, in many sort of industrialized, so-called developed countries, social protection is taken for granted. Not so here. We're slowly getting towards a state where we're trying to bring in certain social protection laws and systems and regulations. Have a look at this clip.
Following discussions in this forum, a call to action paper was developed and an action plan for implementation by government. The call to action paper encourages the government to fulfill its commitment through sustainable actions for an inclusive social protection system and reduce vulnerability and poverty in the country to enable women, children and other vulnerable families and groups to enjoy basic human rights.
You know, I particularly liked the fact that it ended with a call to action that was then presented to the government. And I'll tell you why, Mr. Mboch. I was asked to join a meeting recently, last week, held in Las Vegas, but what you had were people from African countries whose presidents or prime ministers or heads of state had gone for the UN General Assembly, and they had their own conference that they organized in Las Vegas because they thought this was a good time to network and so on. I'll try and be brief. And I said I would only join if they would give me the promise that at the end of the conference they would give themselves some hard targets and tasks to complete. I didn't want us to just have a chat on Zoom. And so when I heard that there was a call to action that was presented to the government, what I would like to have heard more was that how's this going to be followed up? How's it going to be monitored? How's it going to be tracked and traced? I mean, but surely that is what we need, is it not?
Absolutely. Certain targets. I mean, many writers on these things, on economics and policy and implementation and stuff, will tell you that you essentially have a certain way of thinking, a certain mindset that tend to focus more on process-based. So they'll have all the workshops, they'll have all the papers, they'll have all of that.
They'll tick all the boxes.
They'll tick all the boxes. Yeah, and then you said, yeah, cool. And you have others with the outcome-based.
Indeed.
Yes.
And
Emphasis.
That's right.
Outcomes, you know, this is all fine, but give me hard targets.
Yeah,
We've achieved this.
You know, and when the reporter, when Troy came back, I said that call to action is quite a tough one for the government. They're asking the government to alleviate poverty. That's like the hardest thing you could ask any government to do, particularly in Africa, particularly in a country that's not resource rich. But that's what they're asking in this call to action paper. And they go on to say, particularly for women and youth. I mean, we hear this all the time. It should be for everybody. Let's be honest. It should be, if you're going to alleviate it for everybody. Don't single out women and youth. But it's a difficult task, surely. We don't have oil, we don't have diamonds, we don't have gold, bauxite.
Absolutely. Apparently this one, there's a 31 million 5-year
that's right.
You know, program, as it were, towards the social safety net and stuff. So, but this is the problem. Given the high poverty, we definitely need it. What 40% or so? The poverty line.
Below the poverty line.
Yes. So it's a very difficult one. I was reading this Oxford Policy Management. I think they were part of the group, the consulting firm. That's right. That really helped. And then we're talking about the fragmented, uncoordinated aspects of the social safety, that you have so many different actors and the like. So they're trying to create, as it were, it's a social registry, as it were, which would help and to see how best to distribute what we have. So, but you look at it from that angle, you see that we are still trying to put in the structures.
That's right.
It hasn't really begun yet.
Not quite.
There's enough transfer granted, but still trying to put in the structures in.
And for me that's a crucial point, because not only does it apply to something like a social protection system that we're trying to put in place, it applies to anything and everything. And just quickly, I was involved in trying to address cancer rates in Sierra Leone, and so I contacted the UN, I contacted WHO, and the first question they asked me was, does the government of Sierra Leone have a policy for dealing with cancer? And the answer is, and you can quote me because you can watch this, was no. And this was back in 2013. And so we then set aside time to work with them to come up with one. A cancer register. Seems like the most obvious thing. How do you know how many people have different types of cancers if you don't have a cancer register? And so our charity ended up. So it's all well and good to say, you know, we want to have this, we want to have that, but you know, you need a structure, you need a policy that you can work towards, because what is it you're addressing if you don't have the data, you don't have the facts, and you don't have a system for when you get that data or those facts, how am I going to implement whatever it is we come up with?
That is precisely it, and that's a lesson and there, and we know the level to which we've got this institutional breakdown. I mean, who are the people who will come up with this policy? How it's really sort of in a kind of modernizing
Yes.
your economy, your politics, as it were. It includes all that sort of thing. So, as I said, with the institutional weaknesses, and there are many areas we don't really have policies. We just focus on a small number, and then the rest, I do not know. We rely so much on donors, we rely on outside. We are so dependent still in so many areas, we don't even bother to formulate policies.
Well, this is it. And of course, for it to succeed, everything needs to be knitted together, both government and private sector. Otherwise, we're wasting our time.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. Now, since the advent of the coronavirus pandemic, we've seen quite a lot of people donating, just talking about donors, donating all sorts of things to the Gambia, including this type of thing. Have a look.
The COVID-19 pandemic, given the Gambia's weak health system, has been described by some as a blessing in disguise. It has mobilized efforts by government and its partners for a transformation agenda on a massive scale to respond to people's demand for improved health care.
Again, Mr. Mboj, we talked about donors. I'm always I welcome whenever we get these sort of donations towards the health system, because, as our colleague Choi mentions there, it has been a weak health system. But perversely, because of COVID-19, because of some of it's forced us to have a hard look at what was missing. There have been improvements, including, with sort of donations of drugs, material, resources generally, across the board into the health sector.
Yes, and it should be not just in the health sector, but across the board.
Sure.
It's more like the build back better.
Yeah, indeed, yes.
Concept. We were already going through a transition, and we had initiated all sorts of reforms, institutional reform.
Yes, indeed.
So it could be part of a build back better across.
Sorry, Boris Johnson. I know he's been using that phrase all week, but we'll borrow it from you.
That's it.
But yeah,
it's
you're
about
right.
Compass.
Yeah, yes.
These things, they're like a compass.
Yeah.
Ideals are never destinations, only directions. You will never reach there, but at least it will guide your action. So absolutely, we welcome all of this, especially Ndeban.
Yeah, yes.
We must build structures that will take the burden, I think, off Edward Francis Moore Teaching Hospital.
Absolutely.
Everything goes there. So,
and we've seen Bansan, really impressive looking hospital that's been built there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is what we need to do. And yes, one step at a time. There's a huge difficulty in the health area. Everybody knows that. But when we see these improvements, these movements, they give us, inspire some confidence. And I've heard a lot of people, when you talk to a lot of people, they seem to sort of endorse Dr. Samate. Maybe we shouldn't be doing these things. But again, from all quarters.
Yeah.
It's just, I do not know, for some reason, different people from different political parties, mind you,
well, that's right.
in a sense.
True.
So I was quite surprised by that when I talked to a lot of people.
Sure.
So maybe, and even when you look at it, for instance, small teaching hospital, there were some top-grade people and all those people joining them. Maybe the Dr. Mariana, or the Dr. Charles Roberts, and there are others.
Yeah.
So in the long run, in the short term, obviously it's easy for anybody to say, hey, look at the statistics, or look at the figures, this is hard, this is that. Right. But again, when you look in the details, okay, what's been happening from 2016 to 2017, 2019, when you look at the details, you see improvements.
Yeah.
But it's just that you're never going to feel some seismic change, improvement.
But incremental. Yeah.
Low-income country, democracy.
Well, this is it. I mean, and don't forget that earlier in the year, we had 260 Cuban doctors come in. 260. Absolutely. A country the size of the Gambia. That's quite significant. I mean, again, heaven forbid anything should happen between us and Cuba, and they decide to pull them. There'll be quite a gap there, surely.
Yes,
but we're talking about relying on one thing or another.
Absolutely, but I would like to think that this marriage has been going on for maybe 60 years. I mean, when you get a certain age, maybe the talk of divorce. You just never know, though, in politics.
You never know.
You're absolutely correct.
Sure.
So there must be really that emphasis. Government, I think, and anybody should make it a priority, because we've heard independent people saying this. I really want to support people in STEM.
Yeah, quite.
Let us make it a crusade.
We really should.
Women, girls, especially, let's make it a crusade.
That's right.
And just be emphasizing on STEM, drilling it into their ears until all our kids will go to bed and start dreaming about STEM.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant idea.
The future will be quite interesting, to say the least.
The future will be interesting, and who knows, the future might be very, very bright. Thank you for that, Mr. Mbodj. Now on to something which I said excited me quite a lot, which probably tells you a lot about me, and it's about a drug to treat sickle cell that's just been approved by the National Health Service, the NHS, in Britain. Have a look.
Sickle cell disease is incurable and affects 15,000 people in the UK. Welcomed as a life-changing drug treatment, it is to be released to thousands of people in England in what has been described as a historic moment for people with sickle cell disease. The new drug will be delivered by a transfusion drip and works by binding to a protein in the blood cells to prevent restriction of blood and oxygen supply. It will help as many as 5,000 people over the next 3 years. NHS Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard, the first woman to head the NHS, said this is a historic moment for people with sickle cell disease who will be given their first new treatment in over 2 decades.
I was going to use the phrase game changer, but then I realized that I've been saying it rather too much in conversation recently, so I stopped myself. Highly significant, and what viewers may or may not know about the significance of this is that it's the first new drug that's been given completely the green light in 20 years. In Britain. There had been other drugs that were then stopped or withdrawn, or the NHS no longer gave approval for. But this one, they've given complete approval for it. And the reason I said I was excited, because I have friends, I have cousins who suffer from this, and I know what they go through. So something like this is amazing. Surely great news.
Absolutely. And recently the malaria vaccine.
Yes.
Earlier on, you were talking about the COVID, the pandemic being a kind of blessing in disguise.
Right.
It has sort of created what I would call, I think some people call it in literature, kind of creative tension.
Indeed, and interesting. Just quickly on the malaria vaccine. I know we're talking about sickle cell here,
but still they're quite linked.
But yes, and this is it, because of course if you have sickle cell, you can't get malaria.
Exactly.
But what was interesting for me was that when the news came out about the vaccine, the number of people who were posting have been quite excited about it. And then I said, hang on, let me remind you of an earlier post from 8 months ago when you were against the COVID-19 vaccine. So is it all vaccines you're against, or just the COVID-19 vaccine? So on that one, but to go back to sickle cell, I mean, as we've just said, if one has it, then one can't get malaria. But for everybody else, this is great news, and one that's been really greatly welcome, and I was quite pleased to see that some of the people interviewed on the BBC Focus on Africa are people I know, because I worked with the Sickle Cell Society in the United Kingdom. But wonderful news.
Absolutely, and there with your friends, the contrasting reactions, you just see how people's biases
This is it.
Really form the heart of our judgments. We so-called judgments are mere biases, really, in many ways. Oh, absolutely, and we know that, for instance, in Britain, at least, for instance, they will call it kind of like sub-balancing. It's a kind of equality, health equality, because it affects mostly black people.
Well, this is it. And what was good to see Amanda Pritchard there, first female head of the NHS, was the fact that it's apparently a very expensive drug, and yet it's going to be available on the NHS. And for those who don't know how the NHS works, you don't have to pay because somebody else has paid, or you have paid your taxes or your national insurance over the years. And so in a hospital, you can get treated for anything, and you don't have to then fork out money. And so despite the fact that it's quite an expensive drug, it is going to be available on the NHS, and that's also part of the excitement that people are sort of feeling towards this.
Inclusivity.
Yeah, well, indeed.
Absolutely. And we know that, for instance, sickle cell, we do not have the figures in this country, I understand.
That's
We're
correct,
looking at, I couldn't find, but around the world, 80% of cases are only sub-Saharan Africa.
Absolutely right. and what was interesting is that the Sickle Cell Society of Great Britain, or UK, over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, they had been pushing so that now if a couple go and they're about to have a child, part of the test that they give you, because we are disproportionately affected by it, 80 or 90% of people who look like you and I, the test is offered automatically. You don't have to request it and so on. And they'll tell you, yes, your child has a chance. And then if you want to go ahead with the pregnancy, it's up to you.
That's the screening bit.
The screening is
that would be brilliant.
That's automatic now.
Yes, and even over here, when I was talking to the hard of hearing, the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Association, I think he deplored the fact that we do not have that automatic screening from childbirth and stuff like that. So with some of these diseases where screening would help, it would be a good idea, as it were, to introduce them and doing that.
Yeah, thank you. So like I said,
fantastic idea.
Wonderful news, and really, really looking forward to this one. So at this point, our fifth story, time to take a break. But don't go away, because we've got 5 more wonderful stories when we come back. Stay tuned.
The best product in town is back. QCell's MiFi router. Get the best MiFi in the country for just $2,800 and connect up to 15 users with 4G internet speeds and a long-lasting battery life. So rush now to any of our customer care locations and get the best for less while stocks last. For more info, call our customer care on 111. QCell, Senior Boss, the Gambia's quality network. We innovate, others follow. Check out the all-new Tigo 8 at S-Pass Motors. Call 3522-222 or 353-2222 for more information. Sherry.
Hello and welcome back from that break. And if you are just joining us, you're watching QTV and you're watching The Week in Review. I'm Adi Darami, and co-presenting is my fellow what's the word I should use? Co-host and contributor of interesting details, Mr. Mamadou Mbodj.
Thank you.
Mr. Mbodj, thank you. And if you have just joined, you've missed 5 stories, but I was saying to those who were watching before, I said 5 cracking stories to go. Now, for the first time in ECOWAS history, a Gambian has been appointed President of the Commission. Why does that matter? This clip will tell you why.
Dr. Omar A. Toure, a Gambian diplomat, has registered a historic accolade for the country by becoming the first to be elected to the highest position of the executive arm of the West Africa Regional Bloc. He will replace Ivorian Jean-Claude Cassibrou, who assumed the rotational position in March 2018. Dr. Toure will be the 6th person to hold the position since 2007, following its transformation to a commission. The ECOWAS Commission is the main engine for all ECOWAS programs, projects and activities.
There you heard dulcet tones of our colleague Mohamed Lamin Choi, talking about Dr. Omar Toure, who was previously our rep at the UN, of course. And quite an important post, because the Commission actually is in control of all the programs and activities of ECOWAS. So quite an accolade for Gambia.
Absolutely. The influence, what do you call it? And even the stature.
Yes. Because Jean-Claude Cassibrou is somebody that gets called all around the ECOWAS region to kind of come and talk, to arbitrate, to negotiate, to, all sorts of things, really. And that's the kind of position that Dr. Toure will be in.
Absolutely. And recognition for Gambia in that sense, yeah. So, we're not surprised that we're getting our first president of the commission for a very long time. We were really, bad boy.
I think so. I think in times past, they would not have made this appointment, even though they were Gambians who were able and would have been able to do it. But I think, they were sending a message. And I think, in a way, they're sending a message now also to the Gambia that you're on the path of kind of what they would consider to be proper democracy, actually better than many in West Africa, let's be honest.
Yes,
and so this is part of that signal.
Absolutely, even though Edward Singate at some point was a vice president,
That's
or vice something of one of the organs. Oh, absolutely. I mean, Dr. Tutu, huge experience, as you said, ambassador to Ethiopia as well, and former foreign minister, and represented the Gambia with World Trade Center and World Trade Organization and all areas. So this is it. But the key thing here would be the whole body.
Well, you've kind of read my mind, because for me, it sort of apes what happens when somebody says, I want to be president of a country. You might be the best candidate, but what about the people and the structures that you have to work with? Are they up to your standard? Are they at the same level as yourself? And that's for me, because I don't get the sense, looking at Jean-Claude Cassibrou and so on, essentially what you're getting is that you're coming at the head of quite an entrenched structure, and whether Dr. Toure is going to be able to kind of pick, choose, and say, I want this person here, this, I don't know yet. But that's what I would like to see, because otherwise you're having to work with the people who are there and the structures that are there.
That's it. So how much can the president really do?
Yes, can he shake up?
Can he shake up
the
whole organization, the institution, having a vision of where you want to go and shake it up so that you will entrain it along the tracks that you want to follow. So that's the key. When you have the politicking, the presidents, absolutely, the presidents of member states wanting to control, you may really not have much room, much space to really effect the sort of reforms that we need right now. So that is the key. I'm glad that now sometimes you do hear amongst the heads of state having a public spat. I like Mbalo, what Mbalo had with Konde.
That's
what
right.
happened to Konde.
And
I like what Mbalo had with Ouattara. So sometimes we want within ECOWAS, let them have heated debates, disagreements. It shouldn't be a cozy club.
Well, I think Doumbouya in Guinea recently said it to ECOWAS. He said, you're sanctioning me, but you didn't sanction Condé when he changed the constitution. You were acquiescent to that, and yet you're condemning me. Why did you not condemn him? So yes, it's good for people to be outspoken and challenge ECOWAS and say, live up to your mandate.
It must be a serious voice. Let us stop all this politicking, what they call democracy, what they call diplomacy. It's just, oh, come on, please.
Because for me, the kind of sanctioning,
mutual grooming, as it were. You call it diplomacy, please.
The sanctioning, the sanctioning of Doumbouya and Guinea, see, kind of knee-jerk reaction. Oh, this is something we need to do, so let's do it.
Yes, and it exposed the inconsistency.
Sure.
What the person did was really wrong. I mean, you have to say it. You have to condemn it. You have to say it. Until they can really do that, perhaps the executive, and there are certain people, they wouldn't be able to do that. But it'll be interesting to see the younger presidents going in there. They're mainly geriatrics, aren't they? So you have the younger ones coming out and saying, hey, look, we are tired with the old ways.
So
our president is young enough. He can be part of that guard. We are tired of the old ways.
So let's see whether it works.
It's a new younger generation.
The next story, thank you, Mr. Moore. Next one is a short one. World Teachers' Day. I took the time to give remarks to a couple of my teachers on Facebook who happen to be Facebook friends. Anyway, have a look at this short clip.
World Teachers' Day commemorates the anniversary of the adoption of the 1996 ILO UNESCO recommendation concerning the status of teachers. The day highlights the rights and responsibilities of teachers and standards for their initial preparation and further education, recruitment, employment, and teaching and learning conditions. World Teachers' Day has been celebrated since 1994. It has been over a year since the COVID-19 shook the world and disrupted education. In this respect, this year's commemoration focuses on the support teachers need to fully contribute to the recovery process.
Leading into that, I said this should be a short one, and I mentioned the fact that I had actually given a kind of big up to a couple of my teachers, Russell Gardner and Ian Mucklejohn, who were teachers of mine in England, and they responded saying, oh my gosh, thank you for saying this. But I don't forget the fact that there were also terrible teachers that I encountered in my lifetime. What about yourself, Mr. Mboj?
That's it. So it's a double-edged sword.
It is indeed.
Who was it, the Nobel Prize winner in was it biology?
Right.
At school, the teacher said to him, "Oh, forget about science. You're not good at it." So it can fuel you, though.
Yes.
Oh, you think I'm not good? I'll show you. Oh, that's a
right.
motivation. That's a very strong one as well.
Sure.
So in a sense, you've taught him something.
Indeed. Indeed.
So what we can teach in all sorts of ways,
Sure.
but really, where would we be without teachers?
Yeah.
My favorite quote is, teachers are like candles. They consume themselves
Quite.
to provide light for us. Remarkable.
Wonderful one. As I said, a short one. And again, to those teachers who inspired me and encouraged me, thank you still. And to the rest, well, I won't bother saying anything on air. Now on to our next story. Of course, elections are coming up, so we all need to get geared up, including the police. Have a look.
And then the purpose of doing that is to prepare you adequately, to prepare you enough to handle our internal security, most particularly the election. The security landscape or the electoral landscape has changed. Why? It's because the number of parties that have registered this year compared to previous elections, you all know, is different. So assuming that all these parties present candidates, presidential candidates, how are we going to manage the security of all these presidential candidates when they are campaigning? How are we going to manage the ballot box during polling day? How are we going to manage the potential violence that may emanate or erupt as a result of the elections? We pray it doesn't happen. But when you are planning, you have to pray. You have to plan for the unexpected.
There you heard. And Mr. Mboj touches on what you were saying earlier in another story. Plan for the worst case scenario, not the best case scenario. And essentially that's what we heard there, really. And that's what we have to do.
Absolutely. You have to assume that. Yes, and the training, yes, we need to prepare. You know, it's quite heartening,
Sure.
reassuring
Yeah.
to know that they're preparing. One suspects that there would be certain flashpoints.
Yes.
We know the political spectrum. We know what it's like,
Sure.
and that sort of thing. So fantastic, but let them just be careful, because afterwards I went to look at certain Turkish newspapers and read certain things.
Right. Yes.
You know
about
how they're doing, because I was curious to know, actually, the Turkish, how do they do it in Turkey?
Exactly, and because they're coming here to teach us.
And they're coming here to
how do they
teach
do it
us.
in their own country?
So fine, teach us, but let's retain our character.
Indeed.
We know how the country is like,
Sure.
so be careful.
Sure.
There's already a tense, in many ways, political situation.
Sure.
The police, as an agent, as an instrument of state, not government, the state must show more responsibility,
Sure.
so that we'll have a peaceful elections. I think how they perform will, to a large extent, determine the outcome of this, whether it's going to be violent or not, how they handle it.
I think so. I think that's a crucial point. Thank you for that. And now to another story, which again, this one brought a smile to my face. Here in the Gambia, we're celebrating the first ever Immigration Day. What's it about? Have a look.
This award ceremony is the first of its kind since the establishment of the Gambia Immigration Department in 1992 as a separate entity from the Gambia Police Force. The event was organized to remember and celebrate veteran immigration officers who have spent decades in the Immigration Department, maintaining peace and security and enhancing and monitoring the movement of people in and outside the country. In his opening remarks, Ibrahim Mboub, the Commissioner Admin of the Gambia Immigration Department, says the Gambia Immigration Department was established on August 22, 1990. He says prior to this, border management and migration control were under a special unit of the Gambia Police Force. The Immigration Department took charge 3 years later. This, he says, would not have been as successful as it has been without these now retired directors general and commissioners who are being celebrated today for paving the way.
There you have it, retired directors general and commissioners. And the reason I like this is because in organizations that I've been involved in England particularly, I've always tried to enforce this thing about institutional memory. Don't let it get lost. These people had a lot of a wealth of experience, draw upon it even after they leave the organization, and they're being celebrated. A good thing.
Fantastic. It's good to recognize, people who laid the foundations, the pioneers, people who came before you, and perhaps it could be a nucleus. But what the GCCI have done, that advisory council.
That's right.
They can be a kind of
and that's why I chose this story, because it kind of echoed that one, where again what you have is that the GCCI has formed these advisory bodies of former presidents of GCCI, etc., and saying to them, we want to tap into your knowledge of what you went through and tell us, what, give us guidance.
That's it. So whoever Director General that comes along, when this one goes, somebody else will come. You've got that resource, that executive resource there to tap into, which will, make your job perhaps more manageable.
So a good initiative, and let's hope it continues. And now on to our final story of this edition. Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, turned 90 on Friday, and here's a clip.
At the church service on Thursday, his fellow anti-apartheid campaigners are expected to speak. There will also be an online seminar about Tutu's life and values, highlighting the continuing relevance of his work for equality and the need for South Africans to continue Tutu's work for racial equality. The recent racial insult written last month on a portrait on Tutu in Cape Town has raised concerns amongst his admirers, some of whom described the act as hateful and sad. It is also seen as a sign that the fight against racism is not yet won. On this day, to the man who always seems to be smiling, we say happy 90th birthday, Desmond Tutu.
Happy 90th birthday, Desmond Tutu. Mr. Mboj, you and I, fans possibly of Desmond Tutu, a man who has never wavered from the fight in the fight for justice, particularly in his native South Africa.
I mean, he has joined the immortals. I understand that in South Africa they refer to him as the Arch.
That's right.
He's a monument.
That is it. Quite.
And it was much more than politics and apartheid and all. It was moral.
Yes.
Deeply, the source was moral. He was a priest.
Yes. and what's interesting, if you read a lot of the South African newspapers on Thursday, I said Friday, but it was Thursday that he turned 90, a lot of them use exactly the same phrase. They said, this man has been the conscience of the nation. There's not many people you can say that about in any country, really, and yet almost all of them had written independently articles which said exactly that.
I understand that in 1996, he wrote to Graça Machel,
right, yes,
and to tell her that you have to marry Nelson. By then they were just partners, not quite married. Right. You cannot leave it like this. You must get married, otherwise you'll be sending the wrong moral message to the young.
Yes.
That's remarkable. Absolutely.
So
that gives it a flavor of the man. He was deeply moral.
Sure.
Therefore, in many ways, universal.
Yeah, indeed.
Against apartheid, but when the black elite came in, took over power, doing the same, he was telling them exactly the same.
He did not give them an easy ride at all. Yeah.
So that moral spring, that moral base, that was really his strength.
He joined a church which was still segregated when he first joined it, and yet later went on to become its first African archbishop, and he fought to change it, from that moral standpoint, which of course a lot of his kind of moral compass comes from his religion. He based a lot of what he did on what, he quoted frequently from biblical text as to, this is why I'm opposing this is why I'm doing this, that, this is wrong in the eyes of God, and not everybody believes, but that guided him, and he won respect across the board.
Absolutely, and then afterwards, remember, he became even the chairperson, was the chairman of the Truth Commission,
Truth and Reconciliation Commission,
that sort of thing. For him, in the end, he became what? Apostle of forgiveness.
Yes.
That was also quite interesting, touched by the muse of forgiveness. I think that was how Wole Soyinka put it. I mean, and even blaming Senghor for being the poet of reconciliation because of the forgiveness in his poetry, the forgiving that and forgiving that. So absolutely. With that, it depends. To me, he embodies a certain depth of civilization. To be able to forgive stuff like that. Yeah. I personally, I know I cannot do that. I'm not that. I haven't forgiven. I have to say that.
I have to be honest. I'm with you on that because, I know it's all good to forgive. But I remembered watching some of the Truth and Reconciliation, and there were many times when he wept at the testimonies. They were so gruesome. They were so dreadful. And yet he was the same one who was there when the relatives of victims were brought together with perpetrators, and he got them to meet and hug and shake hands. And like you said, he's more forgiving than I could ever be. But that he never wavered from that.
Absolutely. And again, the other person that also I recall comes to mind, Martin Luther King, and a bit of Gandhi.
Yeah,
you can see the similarity, the non-violence,
sure.
Let's get on, the reconciliation, the humanism.
Sure.
That's the key to their thoughts, really. They were deeply humanistic people, and Desmond is definitely like that. Extraordinary. We need him or his example as a moral compass. Sure. It's so difficult to forgive, but yet he's done it. I like that.
I think we both like that.
It might change me yet.
Yeah, quite. And on that point, Mr. Burge, thank you for your interjections and interventions so far. Thank you. And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Until the next time, it's goodbye.